Welcome everybody. Last Sunday, Reverend Melanie gave us a message about New Orleans funerals and burying the year 2019 and releasing the spirit to whatever. And it didn't work for me. I didn't get it buried and released, so I'm still mad. So anyway, today I'm gonna continue the process by having a dirge at the beginning and the saints come marching in. So the dirge will be "Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen," which applies to the last 3 years, and then. But I want to tell you, the first time I played this song, and I have that piece of music, was May 14th, 1957. And I was 12 years old. But I haven't played it since, so it almost doesn't apply. I had to learn it all over again.
Thank you, Sandra.
On the bottom, right?
You're welcome.
On the bottom.
On the bottom.
It's on the side.
Pretty complex, huh?
There's a lot of bottom.
I can
Thank you,
see it
Sandra.
from here, it's on the side. It's on my side.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Bonnie.
You're welcome.
For though my faith is not yours, and your faith is not mine, if we are each free to light our own flame, together we can banish some of the darkness of the world. This was a quote by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, and I know it spoke to me as it spoke to some of you all because we tweeted it and posted it and reposted it on Facebook. I Googled Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks because that struck me as a very interesting name. I had never heard of him before. Jonathan Sacks, Baron Sacks, is a British Orthodox rabbi, philosopher, theologian, author, and politician. He served as the chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth from 1991 to 2013. He's a member of Parliament of the United Kingdom since 2009, and he has life peerage in the House of Lords. His interest is building a dialogue with all religious communities. I found another quote from him that spoke to me also. The supreme religious challenge is to see God's image in one who is not in our own image. So let us light our chalice, and it's number 452.
It's in the order service.
Okay. I sure miss our kids at times like this. Okay.
Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great life.
Let us repeat our affirmation.
Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God.
Thank you. Now is our time to light candles of joy, sorrows, concern, and share with the congregation what's on your heart. So you can come light a candle, or just and speak what's on your mind, or light it, be silent, or I can light it for you.
Spirit of life,
morning.
I wish Nate now was some of the age of some of those young officers.
I think we're just eager to get to Neil's talk here. If you will, turn to 594 for the responsive reading, principles and purposes. I'll start out, and if you will, read the italics. We affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
We
believe that each and every person is important.
We affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations.
We believe that all people should be treated fairly.
We affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth.
We believe that our churches are places where all people are accepted and where we keep on learning together.
We affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
We believe that each person must be free to search for what is true and right in life.
We affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process.
We believe that all people should have a voice and a vote about the things which concern them.
We affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all.
We believe that we should work for a peaceful, fair, and free world.
We affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part.
We believe that we should care for our planet Earth.
Okay. Thank you for that, and let me introduce our speaker for the morning, Neil Carter. How to tell truth from lies, applying critical thinking. Good luck, Neil. Not with us, of course. Not with us.
Y'all are completely free from bias, right? Can you hear me? Am I talking to this? Everybody?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a teacher and I'm used to just yelling, but I'm going to try to do this, okay? I promise. And also I'm going to move around, so that's going to make it really fun to try to capture me. So my name is Neil. For those of you that don't know me, I've been here once before, and I've been to churches that Claire has done twice. This will be my third time, I think. Yeah.
Can you turn that up just a little bit?
You want it a little higher? How about I just chill? Actually,
Yeah.
you want to just up the volume? Because I'm not going to remember to eat it. Like Katy Perry.
Does that help?
How about this one? Oh, no. Ooh, that's nice and loud. Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right, well, so I want to talk this morning about telling truth from lies, but it's more of a series that I want to work on, because I believe, you want me to come back again? Like this maybe?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe okay, good. Maybe sure. I would like to come back regularly and build on this, because I have an idea. I want to build a curriculum. I want to make a curriculum that teaches critical thinking skills to children. In fact, I want to make that the target audience, children and middle schoolers, maybe, because you get them after that, it's almost too late.
Even some Americans.
Yeah, right. So, critical thinking skills is something everybody says they like, but that doesn't mean that they're any good at doing it. And what I'm going to be doing over the times that I come back is I'm going to be talking about how to recognize, truth from lies, how to detect logical fallacies. Have you ever had a class or a talk in logical fallacies? Yeah. Okay. So, for example, sometimes there's Latin words for them. There's one called the tu quoque, that means you too. The you too argument isn't really an argument. It's a change of subject. When somebody, you tell somebody you're doing this thing and it's wrong, and they say, but you do it too. The problem with that is it doesn't actually address whether or not the thing itself is right or wrong. It changes the subject in such a way that it makes it impossible to then say that there's anything wrong with it, which is the opposite direction from where you want to go. The point is to figure out, I'm sorry, this is kind of making loud peas, but it's okay. We just got to turn it way up so people can hear, so it's okay. You have to you have to learn to detect bias in your sources of information. And that's what I want to teach the children in the curriculum. I think it would be a fantastic thing to do. I originally wanted to do it for Camp Quest, which is a summer camp for kids that's specifically devoid of religious overtones. It's made for children, especially in areas where all the camps are church camps, and they tend to be very indoctrinating, you know. They don't teach critical thinking skills, let's put it that way. Okay? In most churches that I've been to, the main ethic, the main ethos, I guess, is to trust authority sources. You know, I mean, you may say what you're trusting is your faith or your religion, but your religion's been interpreted to you by people over the years, and it takes on the flavor and the quality of wherever it's come through. So learning to be discerning about the information you receive is pretty key to a lot of things in life, but it's actually becoming a dangerous necessity today. Yes, thank you for nodding, I understand. Where to even begin? I try to talk to my students about how to determine fact from fiction, and they don't even really care because they kind of think that facts are impossible to find. They're just discouraged. They're so used to hearing that everything they think is wrong that they don't even know what to think anymore. You know, my students believe that Beyonce and Jay-Z are a part of the Illuminati. I don't know if you know what any of those things mean.
Yes.
But they don't. And the only reason they're saying that is because they make a little triangle symbol sometimes when they're singing, which I don't even know why they're doing that. Probably to make the kids think that they're a part of the Illuminati. There's no sense in the world that there's a secret international organization made up of powerful secret billionaires that apparently everyone knows about and knows who's in it. You know, that's not a very good secret society. And of course they went for Beyonce and Jay-Z for their, you know. Anyway, so my students believe things too easily and not at all at the same time. It's a really weird mix. My parents and I disagree. This is being recorded. My parents and I disagree on some things, and we trust different sources of information, right? You probably encountered that. The problem is, once you control how people get their information, you can make them believe whatever you want, especially if you can learn to enclose the whole thing in a bubble, you know, where all the information is self-consistent with all the other information. And so what we've got now is we have very polarized societies. There's not just one America, and there never has been, by the way. There's always been a ton of Americas. You go back to the time when, what was his name again, that was killed?
Vernon.
Yeah. During that time, you have a time period where a lot of people felt like it was a utopia because everything was going well for them. Meanwhile, half of the state of Mississippi or more was in dire straits, not having enough food, not having enough clothing, not having good schooling. There's so many things, no representation in government. America wasn't great. You know, it was only great for certain people. And that's the way it always is. That's the true of any country. So we've always been polarized, right? We've always had different groups of people, but it's getting worse because it used to be that we could settle on information, you know, basic facts, and there are reasons for that. There used to be guards in place that aren't there anymore. Back before the Reagan era, there was a thing called the Fairness Doctrine. And the Fairness Doctrine said that if you're going to get up in front of a camera on national television and say what happened that day, it has to be as free from bias as possible. You want to stick to the facts. Don't even show emotion. Don't show feelings. Don't show personal biases, right? Which is why when Kennedy died, and what was his name? Cronkite started crying. He did it again when we landed on the moon. It was a big deal, you know? And that was one of those powerful moments because a newscaster showed emotion, you know? Now you turn on what calls itself the news and you get opinion pieces disguised as the news. All you need for that is the right kind of background, right? And the right kind of desk and the right kind of setup, and it looks like the news, but it's just an opinion piece. So because we've created these alternate sources of information, we're creating totally different worlds that nobody in this group knows anything that what this group knows. And they all have their own separate understandings of everything. And what bugs me is I want to know how to make them communicate with each other, but I don't know how to make that happen. So that's part of my struggle. And the closest thing I can think of is to get away from the issues themselves, which are polarizing, and talk instead about how to tell what's true and what's not. That's not about the issues. There's no political, technically, there's no political bias to critical thinking skills. One could argue some are better than others. But the truth is, and this is kind of one of my main points I want to get to, learning critical thinking skills starts with you realizing that you can be wrong. It's about learning how little you know about what's right and what's wrong. And the longer we try to sort through things, especially if we're pretty good at telling fact from fiction, the more confident we become in our perceptions. But that's dangerous too. Because the thing is, once you've decided you've got everything figured out, I swear 10 years later, you're going to look back and say, oh, it's so stupid. Why did I think that, you know? And I feel that way about everything. Everything I think now, I'm thinking, I may think this is stupid in a decade, which is why it's nerve-wracking to write things and talk to people, because I'm like, I'm going to think this is stupid in a decade. But I'm never going to think critical thinking skills are stupid. You know, I'm never going to stop asking, does this person or group or organization stand to benefit from me believing what they're telling me? That one simple question would solve so many problems. You know, my students, for example, will go out and they'll buy stuff that's terrible because somebody convinced them it would work for something. And they'll go out and buy whatever. I also used to work in a GNC selling vitamins and things, which, by the way, most vitamins are actually kind of useless. If you eat well, it doesn't really matter what vitamins you take. But if you have a deficiency, that's different. If you know there's a deficiency, that's different. Most vitamins, though, are just excessive. You know, in GNC, we used to joke that it just gave you expensive urine. You know? It was also a different color because of all the B12, but you didn't ask for that much information. Anyway, we sold Dr. Oz products in GNC. By the way, they're all crap. All of them. Don't ever buy anything from Dr. Oz. If Dr. Oz steps up in front of a camera and says, buy this product, it will do this for you, he's lying. He's lying. Here's the thing. He's a doctor, a legit surgeon. That doesn't mean he doesn't lie. Surgeons can lie too. They can sell things too, you know? He stands to benefit from this. And that's true of anybody we're watching. Here's a good example. I'm going to pick on Fox News because I have to. A lawyer gets arrested for doing something illegal. The FBI raids his office, takes all of his files, all of his tapes and recordings and things, and a newscaster, who's not really a newscaster, but just gives an opinion every night, and millions of people tune into this man. A couple of million, Sean Hannity. Hannity gets up and he starts talking about what an injustice it is that they're raiding this lawyer's office. And he's just lambasting the FBI and undermining their credibility. Turns out this lawyer is the kind of lawyer that doesn't actually practice law. And he hasn't for at least a decade. Michael Cohen was what you call a fixer. Okay? And a fixer is a kind of lawyer who doesn't practice law, but uses the attorney-client privilege to mask something else. Turns out, you know, I used to think the mafia just did like Italian restaurants in like Chicago and New York or whatever, or maybe the unions back in the 60s. Well, they've also always used politicians, by the way. But in this case, lawyers, it turns out, are an excellent front for crime, for white-collar crime, obviously. Back in the day, when you wanted to rough somebody up, you sent a big guy with a bat. Now you send a lawyer. You know? And it actually, the lawyer can hurt you worse. They can make you pay for a long time, make your life miserable, which is what people with wealth and resources use. So he's a fixer. His job is to shut people up when they are accusing his client of something. And the thing is, he only had 3 clients. Did you know this? He only had 3 clients. In the last, like, maybe decade or so, we can only find 3 clients. One was Donald Trump. And the main thing he did for him was he protected him against accusations, you know, paid people off. And we know this because there were investigations done by people whose job it was to do that. They're professionals. The FBI doesn't actually stand anything to gain from doing most of what they do. It's just their job. So that's one thing you can ask yourself about whether or not somebody's a professional in the field for what they do, like law enforcement. There was another guy that he was representing who was kind of working with Trump because he was on the finance committee for the Republican convention. Also, it was about a woman accusing him of something. So you get the picture. He's a fixer, and this is what he does. There was one other client on the list. Does anybody know who it was? It was Sean Hannity. So he got up in front of the camera and was just shooting out the FBI, the Democrats, everybody he could, shooting in every direction he could, talking about how unjust it was that they raided this lawyer's office. And then it comes out, and there's a dramatic scene where they're all sitting in the court. And the judge finally says, you have to unmask who the third person is. He tells the lawyers, if you don't tell us this, we can't actually do our job. There's this long pause. They whisper to each other, and the lawyers realize they're stuck. They have to do this, and so they read out Sean Hannity. There were gasps all over the room, and people began getting up out of their seats and leaving. You know those scenes where all the reporters rush to phones? Now they carry their phones with them, but you actually can't do that inside, so you have to run outside to do it. Hannity was one of the ones that he was representing. And of course, since he doesn't actually practice law, it does make you wonder, what was he doing for him? We don't know. But here's the thing, here's my point. Hannity then got up again the next day and still had his job and still got to tell the world how to think about what was happening, even though he was one of the people involved in it. Another example of that would be when Congress was grilling all the different whistleblowers who were saying that something bad had been done by Trump. And one of the main people questioning, the main guy questioning them for the Republican side, was Devin Nunes. And what he was questioning them about was whether or not Trump and his associates had been trying to intimidate and muscle and force Ukraine to do things for him. Turns out Devin Nunes, the one in charge of questioning the witnesses, was one of the ones who was being sent over to do that for Trump. We know this. And the thing is, they all knew that too, but they still put him up there. And that information came out, but I guarantee you, nobody that trusts his side of the political aisle is going to change their mind, even though they know now that they stand to benefit from it. And I'm not saying that the other sides don't have that too. I'm just saying this is a good example. And what frustrates me is once this information comes out, people don't just say, well, then you're done. Like, I no longer can trust you to be objective about this information. Back to the fairness doctrine. It used to be expected. There would even be fines by the Federal Communications Commission if you showed over too much bias. And the reason why Fox was able to get out of some of the legal problems that they created, even though the fairness doctrine has now been gotten rid of, is they said, well, we're not really, all of our shows are not news. Some of them are just opinion pieces. It's just for entertainment. Once they said that, now they're legally not required to back anything up. But the people watching them still think it's real. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking about how to tell truth and fiction. It's not just about picking a channel. If you think it's about picking a channel to watch, you're missing the point. The point is not that we need to find people that we can always trust, or sources of information we can always trust. The point is how to weigh and evaluate information to see whether it's worth accepting. How many of y'all get on social media, either Facebook or Twitter or some other thing like that on the computer or on your phone for more than an hour a day? Raise your hand if you get on some kind of social media for more than an hour a day. Maybe half the room? Okay. So here's the thing. More and more of life is merging online, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because while there are pluses, the downsides are your phone can't give you a hug. Your phone can't visit you in the hospital. Your phone can't bake you a casserole. Can't help you go to the hospital. You need a real community, which is why this exists. Which is why you keep getting together, because we need each other. It's not enough just to connect through our phones. But the problem is, when you live in a place like Mississippi, and you're not like most people in Mississippi, you connect to whoever you can, and they're all over the place. So I have tons of friends I never see and have never met. But they know me better than people that live right, or work with me, that live right across the street. But it's harder and harder to tell what's true and what's not when the only information you have is coming through a digital source. You can't read body language. You can't tell whether a text you're reading is written in anger or in humor. These are limitations. But the problem is more and more of life is getting to be online. So it's becoming a crucial issue for us to learn we can be fooled too. One more thing about this, and I'm going to say one other thing, and then we're going to open up for questions. I promise I'm not going to take a long time today, because I say that every time. We also know, objectively, from law enforcement doing their job, that different countries are learning Americans are easy to fool, really easy to fool. And if you've ever seen our educational system, you know why. And I say that as a representative of the educational system, and I apologize on behalf of the educational system, but we're trying. I promise we're trying. We're making up for a lot of deficits. People are getting into the workforce not knowing how to determine truth from fiction at all. And so Russia, we know, in 2016, actually began paying large numbers of people to create fake social media accounts. They did it in English, of course, and they made it look like it was Americans. And they did all kinds of elaborate things to make it work. We know this because the FBI, the CIA, and all the other intelligence agencies said They had like a whole place that was just called a troll farm, a troll factory. It's like a building where like 100 people work, and their only job was to pretend to be Americans online and to express opinions about things, and then to share them and to try to make them go viral, to make them spread to millions of people in a matter of seconds. And you can do that if you know how to manipulate the way social media works. And there are people who know how to do that. And it's like magic, but it's just digital. So they actually began targeting American subgroups to polarize them against each other. And I think the most fascinating thing about what we learned from the investigation was, what did they pick? Did they talk about Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump? Do you know the answer to that question? They largely didn't. They talked about things that seemed to have nothing to do with the election. First, we heard that they were infiltrating Black Lives Matter groups and creating fake Black Lives Matter groups. Also fake Antifa groups, the anti-fascist groups that tend to be more extreme in the way they deal with right-wing politics, I guess. And what we found out was they were intentionally going into groups and just sowing discord. That was the point. It wasn't to try to make you do anything specific. It was just to split us up. That was their goal. Another weird one that just came out was that they zeroed in on Star Wars subcommunities. Did you read this? This is so weird. They actually went in, and I don't know what computer algorithm or American specialist told them to do this, but they went into groups where Star Wars was being discussed. And they picked groups that were fighting over issues related to interpreting Star Wars. And they actually spent hours and hours and hours crafting fake posts about, this person being angry about this director not doing what he wanted, and this one not wanting this other person to be on the show, and why wasn't this included? Polarized. The more we get mad at each other, we learn to stop talking to each other. And when we stop talking to each other, we get in our own bubble, and we only hear our own perspectives. It's called an echo chamber. And it's frustrating, because more than anything, that's what I fear, is to be closed off from information because of my own personal bias. And that's kind of the main point I'm getting to is, critical thinking skills are great, and we're going to be talking about them when I come back. But the most important thing is to realize that you are also biased, and to learn how to check your own bias, and to never assume that you've gotten rid of it, because you can always get new ones. The more your life changes and grows, the more you have interests that bias, that make you partial to one thing or another. The ancient Greeks had a phrase, know thyself. You familiar with that phrase, know thyself? It's one of the oldest maxims there is. Originally, if I understand right, when they said that, it was used to mean know your place. Like somebody was being cheeky, somebody was being disruptive, and the person in power said, know thyself. Know your place. This is not your place. Be quiet. Shut up. Socrates, according to Plato, took that same phrase and sort of meant something different. Know thyself for him meant know your own story well enough to know how wrong you can be about everything. Because that's the beginning of wisdom. That's the beginning of learning. The Bible says in certain places, because the ancient Hebrews believed, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Because for them, that was what everything rotated around. This is about distrusting every source of information and asking whether you yourself are also a part of the misinformation structure. Know thyself meant, if you remember why you think the way you think about things, the more aware you are of yourself and your own biases, the better you will become at determining fact from fiction. I could say truth from lies, and that's kind of a headline version of what I want to say. And online they call that clickbait. Truth versus lies. Yeah, let's talk about truth versus lies. Here's the problem with that. Those are emotional words, and the word truth means what I believe is real and what's not. It's very subjective, unfortunately. It's a self-important word that makes it sound like you've got it figured out. When you talk about finding the truth, you need to realize you could always be wrong, even if you're right on a level. Everything that's right on one level is wrong if you take a step higher and ask bigger questions. It's weird that things work that way, but there's always a bigger understanding of everything we have, and I'm not there yet. Neither are you. You may learn something next year that changes the way you think about everything. It's like they call it a paradigm shift. Everything gets reorganized around what you've discovered. And we should always be having those, constantly. Never letting ourselves become too calcified in one way of thinking, because then we'll miss something, and we'll be misled. And that's the point, is we become easy to mislead. Right? So know thyself is actually the beginning of using critical thinking skills, learning your own biases. What does my past predispose me to think about this subject? And what do I stand to benefit from believing X versus Y? And by asking those questions of ourselves, it's like, I think Jesus was actually going for this. He says, why don't you take the log out of your eye first, and then you can get the speck out of your friend's eye. He's got a good point. We have this personal bias that makes us, first of all, hypocrites. We have blindness to our own problems and our own faults. But we just have to know our own limitations. And starting there, we can actually start being more accurate in what we believe, but we have to keep testing it, keep asking good questions. That's what I'm going to talk about the next time I come back. But I want to stop now because I want to give you plenty of time to ask me questions about whatever you want to ask. Oh, thank you. This is the part that I wanted to get to. Yes.
I'm working on a committee, and I will not say which one or anything like that, but I'm working on a committee, and the person that's in charge of the committee, I noticed something, and it was something to do with why do we're supposed to have 116 things on the committee.
Okay.
And I thought it was like 104, and I was like, are those left over to go to the next session?
Mhm.
And the person that I was talking to said, well, your things were too expensive.
Okay.
That's not the question I
No,
had.
it wasn't.
That's what Robin said.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of logical fallacies are just a change of subject.
Mhm.
And the thing about recognizing those is your instinct is going to be to challenge the facts themselves. But what would be better is if you just step back and ask, what is the function of what's happening right now? What's happening? What's happening is they're changing the subject to something else to get you off of whatever they're mistaken about and talk about something else. That's like the two-quote way, right?
What about ism?
Huh? What about ism? Yeah. If the response to everything is, what about the other group? They're just as bad. Your answer is, the point is, I'm willing to acknowledge we're all wrong, but we need to at least agree on what's wrong. That's the part we should be talking about. And if somebody continues to keep changing the subject away from what is actually wrong, you have to stop and say, why do you keep doing that? Why is it you don't want to actually say out loud that that's a bad thing? Is it because you have your own personal reasons to defend it? Or at least to say, you know what, everybody does this. That makes you feel like you're not even worse than anybody else. It's all about self-defense.
I think politicians are experts.
Politicians are professionals. I've so come to understand at this point that politicians are just paid actors, right? I should have known that. Frank Capra showed us that as far back as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You know what? We've known that politicians are liars for all of history, and yet we still believe some of them because we want to. We want to believe that they're looking out for us, right? I'm going to be so much more cynical if I keep talking about this. Yes.
An interesting note, but I can't remember the school district, but I think it's the state of Oklahoma, the public school system, is trying to pass a law, and it looks like it may pass because they are very oriented towards this particular item. But, for example, in a state testing where they would measure your learning, students' learning, for example, a question would be, the Earth is 1 billion years old,
Okay.
500 million years old,
Okay.
or 6,000 years old.
6006.
6,006 years old. And if the student marked 6,006, the teacher would be required by law to accept that answer
Oh, I've
as
heard
the
that.
truth.
I heard
What do
about
you
that.
think about that?
My answer is, I need to check the source and make sure you're right. That's my answer. That may be happening. It may not. I don't know. So here's what I do. I want to go see, is there an official decision that's been made, or is that something that somebody suggested that people have not actually agreed on? At which point, the moment it became news, somebody was looking for something to get us riled up. And this is kind of my point, is that's one of the things that would tick me off as a teacher and as a free thinker, a left-leaning person who likes to question things, including things like the age of the earth and I like science and all those sorts of things. But I also know that because I'm passionate about those things, I can be misled to believe that others are thinking things that they're not. But let me get back to what you're saying. That doesn't mean that it's not happening. Somebody put that in there, and somebody wants that to legitimize a bunch of baloney, obviously, that we know is not right, and they're out there, and we still have to be ready for them and take them seriously. Yes?
Just a follow-up question. Personally, then, along that matter, what do you think about the idea that climate warming, climate change is real? And is that true or is that untrue?
Well, as a teacher, my job is to teach what we know from our disciplines, from the disciplines of learning, scientific disciplines including. And when something like 97% of an industry agree on something, of a scientific field, then yeah, we know the world's getting warmer. We know things are getting more climatologically violent. You know, water levels are rising, which means that when a hurricane makes it as far as New York, it floods the subway. Remember that? That was Sandy, I think? Was that Hurricane Sandy? Anyway, that sort of thing didn't happen before because the water levels are high. We know these things. We know this. There are insurance companies adjusting all of their coastal property futures right now based on the fact that they know what the numbers say. The ones who pretend not to believe it are lying politicians and businessmen. It's because it, doesn't serve their interests. And my classes, I tell the truth, okay? On something that we know, fact from fiction, my job is to tell the facts, and if they're wrong, I tell them they're wrong. I don't say, well, that's your truth, so I'm not gonna question your truth. No, my job is I'm paid to help them think more accurately about the world, so yeah, I would correct that. Unfortunately, there are teachers who won't, For a few years when I was teaching first here before I moved to Atlanta, I started asking the biology teachers at the schools where I taught, how do you handle evolution in your class? And 3 of them that I asked out of 4 said, I just avoid the subject. I just don't talk about it. And I know why they're doing that. It's because the moment you do, you get angry parents. These are personal matters to them. But still my job to cover what's true and what's not. And their job was to teach evolution. They didn't. Yes?
Well, I can simplify all this and save you a lot of time.
Okay.
When I was growing up, my daddy's one of his favorite quotes was, "Don't believe anything you hear, and only half of what you see."
That's good. Don't
So,
believe anything you hear.
and
only half of
so
what
it
you see.
served me well.
And here's what needs to change about that. You need to adjust the what you see down to about 1%. And here's why. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you though.
No,
Let you
go
finish.
ahead,
You sure?
that's it.
All right. Do you know what a deep fake is?
Yes.
Deep fake. You know what that is?
It's a digital version of reality that looks very real, but it
You know what Photoshop is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, with Photoshop, every one of your grandchildren know how to use Photoshop, and they can make your head huge or your nose long, or they can cut you out and put you in space, and they can do anything you want with a picture. Digital imagery is easy to manipulate. Video imagery is getting easier to manipulate. I went and saw a movie where Robert Downey Jr., who is in his 50s, was acting in a movie, and he looked like he was back to being 18 again. They did it digitally. They went back, and of course he's an actor, he has a lot of old movies you can probably splice in. Samuel L. Jackson, same thing. He did a retro movie back to the 90s, and he looked younger. They aged him down, and they did it digitally, and it was impressive. It looked real. Did y'all see it? Samuel L. Jackson looked exactly like he did, like 30 years younger. It was amazing. Huh?
That was
Captain
also in the
Marvel.
Irishman.
That was Captain Marvel's what I'm talking about.
The Irishman.
They did the Irishman? Oh yeah. They've got this technology now, okay? Yes.
There was recently a picture on the internet of Obama shaking hands with the Ayatollah,
Okay.
and he had never met him.
Right, exactly. So Photoshop is easy for pictures, but now with video, I'll get to you in a second, Mary. Or this is relevant to this.
I was just gonna say that, I get irritated, I almost, like trying to watch the news, and I guess I'm biased, because
We are, all of us.
I think that the Democrats make more sense than the Republicans, but I'm not saying that they don't do the same thing
Right.
as the Republicans do.
Once they get in power again, that's when they start lying more.
Yeah.
You know?
But I mean, I feel like I'm being laughed at almost in a way,
It's all a show. It's all a show, and there are people who make money off of this, and it's not us, because we're at the bottom, Yes,
First of all, I'm glad to hear that you're working on a curriculum for
yes.
K-12 students. I
Thank you.
think that's the time to get to the, I'm also in the education business, but in higher ed.
Okay.
And maybe this is my own personal bias, but my observation is that students are getting less and less discerning
Yeah.
about being able to, and in things that matter nationally, things that I teach music. So for example, there was a time when the snow was deep, and I was a kid, if somebody was going to purchase an instrument, which is that's a big purchase.
Big deal. Especially
And
when I
so
was-
people would consult with their teacher, they would consult with, other professionals, which instrument, and they're all kind of snowflakes. So now it's very hard to get students to do that, because students will go online and see an advertisement that looks really fantastic, and they'll buy something which is often not very good. And then, we have to work with that student and somehow, and it goes on and on.
Every year.
And
over
so,
over again.
so the question is, there are times that I just want to throw up my hands. What can we do, those of us in higher ed, to try to turn the ship and to try to get people to learn to vet fact from fiction and to apply critical thinking skills to all parts of their lives?
I think ultimately what needs to happen is probably beyond my reach, and I don't know how to get the right people involved in it, but I'm a writer by nature. I like to write. I make fewer mistakes when I write. But fewer people read print. And I put myself in that. You talk about children having a harder time being discerning. I think it's true of all of us. I think that in my parents, for example, believe certain sources. And the reason why I'm using that example is that I saw a meme that said something like 1995, your mom says, don't believe everything you read in the paper or whatever. And then 20 years later, mom says, Hillary Clinton is actually an alien from another planet and she's trying to take over all of our children. I saw it on freedomeagle.net. And you're like, what is freedomeagle.net? I've never heard of that. And the thing is, you can create a website in seconds and make it say things that aren't true. And you can even make the URL, the name of the website look official. But eventually you have to figure out what's right and what's not. Half the things out there that look like news are actually satire. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's a disclaimer to cover their backs legally that says, this is just a satire site. But people will share it and share it and share it and share it. And before you know it, large numbers of people think this is real. They can't tell the difference. And you can try to tell them it's not real, and they should be mad at you. Because did Twain really say it? He gets attributed for lots of things he didn't say. But I think he said that it's a lot harder, or somebody said, it's a lot harder to convince somebody, it's a lot harder to fool somebody than it is to convince them that they have been fooled. Because ultimately the one person we seem to trust the most is ourselves. And that needs to change. I'm not an unbiased person. Yes.
I want to say this that's really disturbing. I read an article about Trump, and they were saying that more and more people don't care. And one of the things that came out in that series was that Hillary Clinton was exonerated by the Justice Department, and nobody knows.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody knows because nobody cares. She's still lock her up.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think it was the feminine part of my argument, but it's good for Bill Clinton, for other people too. It's not just the woman.
Well, once they're inside that bubble, and again, I'm always looking for my own bubble. I'm always trying to figure out what my bubble is. That's like it's an obsession with me. But once you're inside that bubble, everything is self-consistent, so that will never change. Those people will probably go to their graves thinking that she was up to something. There was a conspiracy theory that somebody created, and I don't know if this was one of the Russians or not, but we actually traced everything back to a lot of specific Russian people who created some of these stories. Some of them were Americans, but some of them, it's complicated, but they argued that underneath this one pizza place,
The child pornography.
that there was a child pornography, child trafficking.
Yeah,
It was
right.
Roger Stone. They think it was Roger Stone.
Well, he was involved in pushing, and the thing is, that's one of the things we have to grasp, and I hope that people.
And
will
wasn't
learn
there a
from this.
guy with a gun or something that was on his way to?
I don't remember some of the details, but there have been whole groups that have been generated to feed these theories, and the argument was that there's like this child sex trafficking ring, and it was under the pizza place. And so after they investigated, the pizza place was like, leave us alone, because people were descending on them from all over the world.
One guy went there armed and ready to.
Right,
One
that's
guy
what
got
I
a jackhammer.
thought, yeah.
One guy got caught with a jackhammer drilling into the sidewalk next to the building because he was trying to get to the basement where the children were, under the pizzeria. Dead serious, this is real life. So yeah, people are getting more and more easy to fool, but people are getting better and better at lying. Because, back to the deep fake again, with a deep fake, you can actually, they now have technology where you could put things on my face and I can start talking, and they can take a video of Obama or Trump or whoever you want, and they can make it look like that person is talking my words. I mean, I can do facial expressions, I can do all of them, and it will make his face do it, and it looks as real as any news clip that you've seen, you know? It's scary, because the thing is, this is new technology. Wait till it gets better. It's going to get to where, I don't know how to know what to trust. We're going to have to be a lot more cynical, but everybody else is not going to be, and that's the big problem, is to deal with that. That's what I want to know, is how do I deal with the fact that everybody else is so easily fooled? Because I can't convince them. It makes me look like I'm the crazy one, or the one that's been fooled. Yes?
One of the problems too is that we've become such a specialized society.
Yes.
That we have to rely on experts' opinion. You
And
know?
maybe that's just a result of growth.
But you've got to take a doctor's opinion about your health, you know? You're taking a science's opinion about climate change, and you get to the point, you know, we can't be experts on everything.
No. There's too
So
much.
you have to take an expert's opinion, but it's hard to evaluate
Right.
which
Well,
one is true.
so we have to get better at figuring out what is this person actually an expert in. And you're familiar with the halo effect. The halo effect is when somebody who's an expert in one thing is trusted in other things, especially unrelated things. But because you trust them in one thing, you transfer that trust onto other things they don't know as much about.
Like Dr. Oz.
Like Dr. Oz, thank you. That's
Yeah.
a good example. He is a renowned heart surgeon. He's an extremely good heart surgeon. Works for one of the big hospitals, I forget, up in wherever, New York, someplace important. But he doesn't know about whether raspberry ketones are going to make you burn fat instantly without exercise.
Or Ben Carson.
Oh,
Yeah.
Dr. Phil.
Let me start on Ben Carson.
Right.
Yeah. So brain surgeon, actual
Right.
brain surgeon who I'm afraid, I don't know how he ties his shoes in the morning, I mean, like.
And my son-in-law works for him.
Seriously? Wow. Yeah, so you can be good at one thing but not good at all the others, and the halo effect is that thing that makes us think that they're good at all the others. We do this too. We trust people. I'll give a good example. So I, for a while, ran in these sort of atheist subculture circuits. I got tired of it very quickly, by the way, because the most important thing in the world is not figuring out whether or not whether this God is right or that God is right, which is, this is my Unitarianism coming out, is that we are always going to be wrong. We're just trying to get less wrong, right? We're just trying to get less wrong. And if we use words to try to refer to what we don't understand, we have to be patient with ourselves to not know whether everything we're saying is exactly right. This is the point I want to try to make. I don't want to get off the subject, but say Richard Dawkins says something, or Sam Harris, or someone else who's like a celebrity in these atheist circles. If they make a comment about politics, then suddenly a whole bunch of people, especially younger people, immediately agree with him because they trust him in other things. That doesn't mean he's any good at politics. It doesn't mean he understands feminism. I mean, a 70-plus British white man who has been teaching at Oxford or Cambridge, wherever, for his whole life, probably doesn't know what it's like being a black woman in Texas, right? Or in Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's a lot that you don't know because your experience is limited to what you know. Once you start talking about other people's experiences, you kind of look like an idiot to me personally, because you don't know what you're talking about. Or you look like a child that thinks that they know everything. Yes.
Where are we going as a human
You know,
civilization if our lives are not grounded in reality anymore?
It's a really good question. And I don't know where we're going. I mean, what's going to happen 100 years from now? Do you have any idea? Do you have a guess? I mean, are we going to be better? Are we going to look like Star Trek, where we're idealized and everybody's got their specialized functions and they're working well together because they communicate? Or is it just going to descend into chaos?
Well, I think that, before 100 years is up, I think this planet will be destroyed.
Well, the planet will be fine. We will be the ones that go away.
She'll take care of it.
There was
Mother Nature
They will.
There was a meteorite that hit, and I don't have all my facts, hit the coast in Texas, not Mexico, Yucatan, and it was 17 miles long, and it wiped out, of course, the dinosaurs,
It's one of the great extinctions.
right through extinction, through global warming from the meteorite, and only 15% of the life forms, and I'm taking that with plants, life forms survived, and here we are.
I read somebody that said that 99% of all species that have ever lived on the planet have already become extinct. And then only 1% now, what you see now is the 1% that's left over, some of which go way back, some of which is more recent. Because that's amazing, that's one of the things that changes my mind about a lot of things, but anyway, yes.
You don't think within 100 years there'll be a nuclear war?
You know, I don't really know, because so let's go back to the 50s and 60s. You know what it's like to turn on the news and see people throwing, what do you call those things? Molotov cocktail. I never say it right because there's none that's actually a drink. Anyway, you see people getting water hoses poured onto them, by the fire hoses by the cops. Which by the way explains why my students grew up in subcultures that don't believe authorities and don't trust them, because their parents and grandparents had fire hoses squirted on them just for trying to vote or eat in a restaurant. So you have seen change, you have seen violence, and you've seen us overcome it. So you know that it's possible that we could have a very violent time, which is possible, by the way. Over the next couple of years, I feel like no matter what happens politically, a lot of people will be angry. That's the one thing I know. And some of them will get stirred up into a frenzy because they believe everything they read online. Sometimes it's believing what other people believe, but you're wrong about what they believe. You think that what they think is actually a caricature of what they think, because whoever told you what other people believe wanted you to be angry. It's good for them for you to be angry. They probably had some purpose themselves for getting you angry. It makes you motivated to come join them in whatever they're doing. So people have a motivation for misrepresenting what other sides of issues believe. They get it partly right, but then they just make it, they expand it, they make it a caricature. So we keep missing each other. We're not really talking to each other, and we've got like an imaginary version of our political opponents. Yes, ma'am.
This has almost nothing to do with what
Hey, I'm
we've been
bouncing all
talking
over the
about,
place, so.
but I'm looking for a simple answer,
I probably
which
don't
you're
have
not gonna
it. No,
have.
I don't have a four answer.
Because every one of us have run into this. Intelligent, educated people, you ask them why they are for Trump, one issue, abortion.
Yeah.
What's the reply? How do you argue with that? None of us are for abortion.
No, not really. Yeah.
What do you say? I mean, relatives, ministers?
It's
Yeah.
less
Just
cruel
to
to be pro-choice, and it's more, it helps women to be pro-choice, and being so-called
I
anti-choice.
get all the
That's being cruel.
issues.
But I don't know what the word is to them then.
Just to be honest with you, I've become so discouraged, and I'm just being honest, because when somebody has been indoctrinated over decades about something, you're not going to change their mind in a conversation. The closest thing you can do is sow a seed of doubt.
Well, it's the one issue thing is what bothers
I
me.
know, and it'll be something else 10 years from now.
Yeah.
You know what? For all I know, and everyone think I'm crazy, but for all I know, in 50 years, we may be just growing babies. Instead of women holding them, we may just be growing them somewhere in a safe, nurturing environment, and we'll create a medical, we can keep people alive for a long time, Well, we could also probably grow babies for too much longer. And I don't know what all kinds of problems that's going to lead to.
And taking
Because who gets to
geniuses to
raise them?
impregnate
Yeah.
Yeah?
So you
Oh, yeah, and then you've got, right, this has been explained, but I actually think that this is a real possibility, at which point the abortion issue will become pointless, because the way we give birth won't even be the same. Babies will be viable from the very beginning, because they'll be supported by machines. I mean, there's just, who knows. Point being, that one works right now, and that's a handle on a community that people are using to steer them.
Distractions.
It is. Well, when you go into a place and you ever seen Music Man? Music Man, come on, this is classic. Music Man. I can't remember the main actor's name. He goes in. He's Harold Hill in the show, and he is a con man. He doesn't actually do anything except he's good at talking. He'd be a great politician. He shows up to a town, and the first thing he does is he looks around to see what are the problems of this town. Oh, they got a pool hall. Well, you know what pool halls mean? That means means cigarettes, it means girls and guys hanging out together, they're gonna be drinking, they're gonna be doing all kinds of no good because they got a pool hall, which was probably largely true. But what else were you gonna do in the town for fun? But anyway, pool hall became the bad guy, the boogeyman, you know, and all he had to do was whip them up into a frenzy and get angry about this and scared, and he waited till they're in a vulnerable position, and he said, I've got your solution. It's this thing that I've got for you. That's just a salesman, you know, and preachers do the same. They say, you've got problems, let me list them for you, and then they go through standard things that everybody deals with, and they say, here's your solution, it's what I've got. That's just a sales process. So he goes in and says, what you need is a band. You know, we're gonna give your kids a band to get them out of the pool hall because they're gonna be busy practicing. The only problem is he didn't know music. He didn't have any idea. They had to just imagine that they knew how to play music. It was an amazing con job, but it worked. I can't remember why I was going off on that. The handle. Somebody who is a good salesman goes in and knows how to find the handle and then use it to steer people. And that's what abortion became. It was a crafted issue. It was crafted by, this would take too much explaining. I've got a whole article. If you go look up, what does the Bible say about abortion? I wrote a long article telling the history of how abortion came to be, what everybody's focused on. And basically it was chosen for expediency's sake for the Republican Party to have a hold on the South. You know, it was part of the Southern strategy. Find an issue, make it the issue, you know? And it's fascinating because people are always talking about what religion's influence is on politics and how churches are controlling the government or yada yada. No, they're not. They're pawns. Religious institutions are not as powerful as the ones that have all money, like the real money. And so the faith of people becomes a useful handle, and that's what they knew. And they knew they were going to use that, and they did it, and it was successful, and it worked. And they still are sure that this is the main thing they need to be voting for. And they're sick to their stomach. I do need to make this point. They hate it. Most people who voted based on that one issue hate everything about him and everything he's doing. And the reason they don't want to talk about it is not that they still think he's wonderful. Some of them do. I realize there are people who actually think he's a man of God. They're hopeless. I can't talk to them, honestly. I mean, what are you going to say? But there are others who don't want to talk about it because they know they're wrong, and it's just they don't know what else to do because they were taught that that's the thing that matters most, and now they're just disgusted. And they'll probably do it again, too. When he runs, they'll just do it again if he's not in office because they still think that they're bound by God's will to do that. Anything else before we wrap up?
Neil,
Yes.
would you like to join us for lunch today, and maybe other people who would like to go to lunch?
Sure,
We can
yeah.
continue our conversation.
I won't turn away
We
from
will
you.
buy you lunch.
Thank you. I'm a teacher. I don't have any money. So. Yes.
One last thing, I found my source for all I'm talking about.
Excellent. What is it?
It's the latest issue of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, based in Washington, D.C. They do legislative oversights, and they mention in an article there, you can go to that site, they mention that legislation in one of the states, among other things, a conservative legislature, and that's one of the items that's been presented in one of the states. So that was my source.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to dig into it. I'm going to do a deep dive. I actually know some of the people that run that. And I think that all of us have reasons to get people worked up about things. And it's just good to ask questions about them. I think they're actually good people, by the way. The guy who heads up Americans United is Barry Lynn.
He used to be, now we have
Oh, you got a new guy,
a female
okay.
director, and she's been in for about a year. He retired last
Do
year.
you remember the name?
I forgot her name, but she's the first Jewish leader of Americans United.
Yes, I don't know her. That's right. Okay. So before we finish, one last question. How many news sources can you name that more often than not seem to get it right when they tell stories? And by that I mean they give sources, and when you follow those sources, they turn out to be correct. How many can you name? Yes.
Reuters.
Or is it Reuters? I don't know how to say it right. They're pretty good. They're pretty good. Yeah. What's another one?
PBS.
PBS. Okay.
PBS.
Public broadcasting. Why would public broadcasting be a better source of information?
Because they don't have a stake in making money on it.
It's a nonprofit. Okay? Which isn't to say nonprofits don't need money too. They do. But they're going to be less biased than somebody who is using the free market to determine what they say on their channels. Anything else besides PBS or NPR? Probably similar.
Well, C-SPAN, I don't know if you can call them a news source,
Well,
but they,
but
you know,
sure.
it's sort of the,
It's,
it's direct source material.
right, exactly. Anything else?
Well, I wanna say that what I do personally have for the last couple of years, because I was getting like you, so confused, I have about 3 or 4 or 5 sources that I think that they give the news, and then I compare the reports, and
Yes.
come to my own
Yes.
conclusion.
The key issue is never trust one source. It's always check everything with somebody else. And there are certain sources I have learned that they may be right, but I have to see it somewhere else first, and not a place that's like the same kind of subgroup. I need to see it. If people on opposite sides of an aisle agree on a fact, that's pretty good these days. That's a big deal. But also, I would say BBC is a good one. Okay, some of the foreign news stations, they actually still care about trying to get it right because they're less market driven. In America, we're market driven. We give the news that sells. You know, I want to teach my children that. Y'all know this, but my kids don't. All right, thank you very much.
Call the restaurant. Castadores?
Yeah, Castadores, and if you raise your hand, I'll go early and get us a place.
Good account.
Account, yeah.
Would you all like to join us at Castadores? Okay.
All right, I'll be next.
Okay, it's us.
Okay, okay. Well, let us extinguish our chalice. And then we'll do our closing. We extinguish this flame, but
Not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.